In Laboratory Reddit, today's story is...
After organizing the family vacation, my mother-in-law sent me a message saying, "It would be better if you and the baby leave after dinner so my divorced daughter can have space." What she didn't imagine was my husband's reaction when I showed him the message. Quote, "Vacations should always be a time of joy and fun, but I've long learned not to expect peace when it comes to my in-laws. My husband Kyle and I have been married for 4 years, and although our relationship is solid, it has always been tested by his family dynamics. I'm not talking about typical in-law difficulties. I mean that his family has a very specific way of doing things. They are fervent defenders of traditions, expectations, and, frankly, emotional blackmail if you don't align with their wishes. To make matters worse, we now have our little Lily, who is 6 months old. The past year has been exhausting, trying to balance work, motherhood, and dealing with constant family drama. I love Kyle and adore Lily, but there are days when I honestly feel like I'm the only adult in the room. Kyle's mother, Karen, always imposes her way of doing things. When she insists on a traditional holiday gathering, it's rarely a question of whether we can join, but rather how we will adapt to her idea of the perfect family celebration. This year was no different. Kyle and I had discussed the topic for weeks, debating whether we should skip the family gathering altogether and enjoy a quiet Christmas at home. We didn't need more stress, but in the end, Kyle thought it was better to keep the peace and respect tradition, so I reluctantly agreed, wanting to give the benefit of the doubt. After all, holidays should be fun, right? I could already feel the tension rising as the date of the gathering approached. Rumor had it that Kyle's older sister, Jessica, his main rival for the title of favorite child, was going through a difficult divorce. I had always gotten along relatively well with her, at least on the surface, but I knew her situation would add another layer of stress to an already complicated family dynamic. Jessica has never been an example of emotional stability, and now with her divorce, things threatened to become even more dramatic. Still, I kept quiet to avoid stirring the waters. If Karen wanted everything to revolve around Jessica, that was her problem. The holiday invitation arrived early, as always, accompanied by the usual set of instructions. Karen had her rules. The house would be open from noon until midnight. No one could arrive before or after, no exceptions. And, of course, it included a sign-up list for food contributions, specifying the exact portion sizes so that no one would be left out. It was as if she kept an unspoken list of who mattered more based on how much they sacrificed for the family. Kyle and I were assigned to bring the turkey, and I could feel the weight of that responsibility. If the turkey wasn't perfect, Karen would certainly let me know. Still, we moved forward. We didn't have many alternatives. As the date approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I mentioned it to Kyle, but he dismissed it, assuring me that everything would be fine. I wasn't convinced, but I also didn't want to ruin his holiday spirit. He was really trying to mediate between his family and me, and I knew how important the holidays were to him. 1 month before the celebrations, the real problems began. I was reviewing the event program when I received a message from Karen. At first, it seemed quite harmless. "Hi, sweetie. I just wanted to remind you about the holiday plans. We're all very excited to have you and Lily here. As a heads up, there might be a small change in the seating arrangement. I'll explain soon." I wasn't sure what it meant, but I assumed she was just trying to manage the increasingly large family. However, when I heard from her later that night, I couldn't have been prepared for what she said. "After thinking it through, I believe it would be better if you and Lily left after dinner. I know it might sound strange, but I really want Jessica to feel like she has space to vent after her divorce. She's been through so much lately, and I think it's important for her mental health." I was shocked, to say the least. I stared at the screen, rereading her words and trying to make sense of them. Leave after dinner because Jessica needed space? It was like a punch to the stomach. I tried to stay calm and think clearly. Surely this was some kind of misunderstanding, right? I responded, trying to maintain diplomacy, although indignation was beginning to bubble inside me. "Karen, I'm not sure what you mean. It's a family celebration. Are you asking me to leave after dinner so Jessica can have more space?" Her response came immediately, as if she had been waiting to justify herself. "Yes, exactly. I know it might be uncomfortable, but I think it would be for the best. She needs time to recover, and it's very important that we're all there for her." I wanted to scream. I had just had a baby 6 months ago. I needed support too. I didn't need to be thrown out of a family celebration so my sister-in-law could vent about her divorce. But the more I argued about it, the more I realized that Karen had probably been planning this for a while. Jessica's divorce weighed on her mind, and it was clear she was going to prioritize her daughter above everything else. It was obvious this was going to be a problem. The question was, how was I going to handle it? Update 1. The tension was palpable as I read Karen's message over and over on my phone. The words hurt more with each reading, especially as I realized how naturally she had dismissed me and my daughter. It wasn't a simple request, but a blatant disregard for our place in the family. After all I had done for them, after raising their granddaughter, Karen expected me to just pack up and leave, as if Jessica would feel uncomfortable with our presence. It's not like I was going to devour her or anything. I didn't respond immediately. I knew I needed to address it directly, but I wanted to process what had happened before causing a scene. As much as I tried to stay calm, I couldn't ignore the knot twisting in my stomach. I had been part of this family for years, and suddenly I felt that everything I had given them lacked value. Kyle had just returned from work when he came into the room after showering. I decided to tell him. His usual relaxed demeanor disappeared when he saw my expression. I handed him my phone showing Karen's message. He frowned as he read it, his face darkening. He returned the phone without saying anything at first. He looked at me for a long moment, as if processing what was happening. His face reflected disbelief. He didn't understand how his mother had the audacity to ask us to leave for someone else's comfort. He said it was ridiculous. We were family, and yet Karen was telling us to pack up just to satisfy Jessica's emotions. I nodded. It was becoming more evident by the moment how selfish and inconsiderate they were being. Kyle didn't hesitate. His anger grew and his body tensed. He grabbed his phone, went to the living room, and activated the speakerphone while dialing his mother's number. Our baby was still sleeping. The familiar ringtone echoed from across the room. "Mom," Kyle said when she answered, in the coldest voice I'd ever heard from him. "We're not coming to dinner, and we won't be staying afterward either." I held my breath as I imagined Karen's confusion on the other end. She didn't understand what was happening or how we dared to defy her plans. Kyle didn't allow her to say a word. He warned her not to even try to change his mind. He made it clear that, after her request for us to leave so Jessica could have space, he'd had enough. He told her he wouldn't tolerate it anymore, that he was tired of letting her dictate to us like that. He added that he wasn't interested in hearing more excuses or justifications, that it was obvious she had no consideration for our family's well-being. Then he lowered his voice and continued with sharp words, reminding her of everything I had done for his family and how she was treating me. He stated that I was the mother of his daughter and that no one would take priority over us. He would not allow me to be relegated just so Jessica could feel better. He had endured enough, and this behavior was unacceptable. I could hear Karen's voice rising on the other end, but Kyle wouldn't let her speak. He told her in unequivocal terms that Jessica's drama would not take priority over his wife and daughter. He made sure she understood that we were now his family, and they had no right to try to throw us out. I could imagine Karen's shock. Kyle was finally defending me, defending us. There was no going back. But he wasn't finished. He continued in a harsh voice, telling her she had no idea how much this had hurt both of us. He pointed out the hypocrisy of her behavior, emphasizing that Jessica's emotional baggage had always taken priority over everything, but no more. It was time for her to face the consequences of treating us as if we didn't matter. The line went silent for a moment. I noticed Karen trying to process everything Kyle had just told her. She was stunned, speechless, probably searching for some defense. But Kyle still wasn't done. He broke the silence with final, inflexible words. He told her we would not participate in her holiday plans unless she was willing to apologize for how she had treated us. He added that it wasn't just about dinner, but about respect, something that had been absent from his family for too long. After a tense moment, Kyle hung up without waiting for a response. The finality of his actions shocked me, but I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. He had taken a stand, not passively accepting his mother's request. He had stood up for me and our daughter. He was tired of letting his family walk all over us. I slowly approached where Kyle stood, with the phone in his hand. He looked at me, and in that moment, I saw in his eyes his determination to protect me and Lily. We had been through a lot, but this was different. It wasn't just about protecting our daughter, but about protecting our marriage and our little family. "Kyle," I began, but he pulled me into his arms before I could finish. Emotions flooded over me, and for the first time that day, I felt a sense of peace. He wasn't just my husband, he was my ally. We were a team, and no one, not even his own mother, would break that. He pulled away slightly, looking into my eyes. He asked if I was okay, his voice softening as the tension in the room began to dissipate. I nodded, noticing how the anger and frustration I had been holding in for hours started to fade away. "Now I am, thank you." Kyle smiled at me with a genuine, warm smile. He kissed me on the forehead and promised that we would have our own holidays, just us and Lily. It didn't matter what others thought. As long as we had each other, that was all that mattered. Update 2. The days following Kyle's stand were a whirlwind of emotions. I felt empowered knowing that he had defended me, defended us. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that things between us and his family would never be the same again. Karen's words still echoed in my head, how she had discarded our importance in favor of Jessica. It hurt, and I knew that wound would take time to heal. However, as the days passed, something unexpected happened. Kyle's father, Dave, called me. I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk to him. He was a good man, but he usually remained silent when things went wrong in the family. I braced myself for another uncomfortable conversation. To my surprise, his tone showed no defensiveness or hesitation. He sounded genuinely concerned. He asked how I was doing and immediately apologized for Karen's behavior. He said he would handle the matter and made it clear that no one should ever treat us, neither me nor our daughter, the way Karen had done. I listened, moved that Dave wasn't minimizing it or trying to justify it. I had always seen him as a somewhat passive figure in the family, someone who tended to let Karen take the reins. But there he was, taking full responsibility for her actions. I explained what had happened, how Karen had tried to throw us out to give Jessica more space, and how dismissive she had been toward me and our baby. Dave remained quiet while I spoke, and when I finished, he took a long sigh. He apologized again, this time more deeply. He stated that Karen had no right to treat us that way, and that he would address it. He assured me that this behavior was not something he approved of, and that it would not happen again. His words were like a balm on an open wound. It was comforting to hear that Kyle's father was willing to step in and address his wife's behavior, even if it was a bit late. I wasn't so naive as to believe that everything would magically return to normal. There were still deeply rooted problems in Kyle's family, and one conversation wasn't going to solve them overnight. I tried to keep things as calm as possible. Kyle and I continued with our routine, focusing on our daughter and our lives beyond the chaos of family drama. The holidays were still approaching, but we hadn't heard much from Karen or the rest of the family. I half expected them to get in touch, maybe even apologize, but they remained silent. Then, out of nowhere, I received another call from Kyle's father. This time his tone was more serious. He wasted no time. "I wanted you to know that I've made a decision," he said, without hesitation in his voice. "Karen doesn't know yet, but I've canceled the holiday plans. Everything is canceled." I was stunned. I asked if he was serious, and he confirmed that yes, he had canceled the entire family gathering. I needed a moment to process what he was saying. I hadn't expected it. It's not that I wasn't glad to hear it, I just hadn't thought Dave would take such a drastic measure. He explained that he couldn't allow what had happened to continue, and that he wasn't going to force Kyle or me to endure Karen's behavior, especially with our baby involved. I asked again, unsure if he was decided. I mean, it's the holidays, I didn't mean to cause more drama than there already has been. But Dave remained firm. It's not going to be celebrated anymore. I couldn't, in good conscience, allow what Karen did to go unresolved. You don't deserve to be treated that way, especially when you've just become a mother. I'm going to put an end to this now. His words left me speechless. I had expected perhaps an attempt at reconciliation, some olive branch extended by Karen or the family, but instead, Dave had taken control by canceling all the holidays. I wasn't quite sure what to think, but at that moment it felt like an important decision. He continued by saying that I didn't have to deal with this, and that he wasn't going to allow her to keep doing this to me or Kyle. Your family deserves to be treated with respect. I could sense the sincerity in his voice, and for the first time, I believed he was really standing up for me. Dave had always been the quiet one in the family, often staying out of the drama, but now he was taking the initiative. It was a turning point. I thanked him, overwhelmed by his support. It wasn't what I expected, but it was exactly what I needed. Dave assured me that he would make sure Karen understood why the holiday plans were canceled and that he wouldn't allow her to manipulate the situation any further. The conversation ended with Dave's promise to keep me informed, saying that he would handle everything from that point on. I was left with a sense of cautious optimism. Perhaps things would finally start to change in Kyle's family. Maybe, with Dave stepping in, the toxic cycle would finally break. I told Kyle what Dave had said, and he was equally surprised, but pleased. He had never imagined his father would take such a firm stance. Kyle was grateful that his father had finally confronted Karen, and we both agreed it was a step in the right direction. Over the next few days, a strange calm settled in. Karen hadn't contacted us, which I considered a good sign. Kyle and I focused on our daughter, enjoying the peace and quiet, without the imminent anxiety of family gatherings. However, a part of me couldn't completely relax. I knew Karen's temper was unpredictable, and I didn't trust that she would accept defeat so easily. Then, a couple of days later, we found out that the holiday event had been officially canceled. The entire extended family had been notified, and Dave had canceled the whole thing. Karen, most certainly, already knew that the holidays would not be celebrated. I wondered how she had reacted when she found out. Would she accept Dave's decision, or would she explode? At that moment, I didn't care. I was just grateful that, for once, someone had stood up for us. It was no longer about the holidays. It was about setting a boundary and demanding respect. I felt empowered. I wasn't going to be crushed by Karen. Neither was Kyle. We were a family, and we supported each other. Update 3. The fallout from Dave's decision to cancel the family holidays plunged the entire family into a tense and uncertain silence. Karen, who had remained quiet for the past few days, finally reached out. She couldn't keep her silence for long, could she? She sent me multiple messages, all filled with venom and guilt, demanding that I fix things. Apparently, the chaos from the cancellation of the holidays had been too much for her to process, and she needed someone to blame. As usual, I was her scapegoat. Kyle had remained unmoved by her attempts to vent. Jessica had also tried to contact him, sending him an angry message blaming him for everything. He didn't even dignify her with a response. He had finally reached a point where he realized that, no matter what he said, they would never change. They had crossed a line, and he wasn't going to let them make us feel guilty for setting boundaries. Both of them could scream and rant all they wanted, but he had learned to ignore them, keeping his focus on what really mattered: his family, not the toxic cycle they were trapped in. A few days passed without major news, but then the bombshell dropped. Jessica was no longer welcome in her parents' home. Her father had finally reached his limit. He had disowned her, fed up with her privileged behavior and constant demands. Her husband had filed for divorce, claiming that Jessica's only interest was spending his money without contributing anything. He had tried to make her understand the value of hard work, but to no avail. Her constant disregard for the relationship and her refusal to change had led him to the point of no return. He wasn't going to continue allowing it, and now she was left alone, with nowhere to go except back to her parents, who had also had enough of her. At least that's what Kyle told me. I couldn't say I felt sorry for her. In fact, I almost felt relief. This was the same woman who had belittled me and dismissed my baby's existence in one of her messages to Kyle. Jessica had been part of the toxic environment in Kyle's family, and now the consequences of her actions were catching up with her. She had no other refuge to turn to. But Karen didn't seem to see the irony in all this. She sent me another barrage of messages, the first arriving in the dead of night. Since I hadn't been responding to her calls, she assumed messages were her only line of communication. She asked me, in the most passive-aggressive tone possible, to fix things again. Apparently, in Karen's world, everything was my fault. Me, who had stood up for myself and refused to tolerate more of her treatment. She had the audacity to blame me for the cancellation of the holidays, claiming that I had ruined everything. She said I was being irrational and blamed the baby for all the chaos. According to her, Lily was nothing but a crying baby, and I had no right to bring her into a situation where people were trying to rest. I could barely contain my fury. It was as if she had no idea how wrong she was. She made it seem like the mere existence of my daughter was an inconvenience to her. What kind of grandmother was she? She continued by saying that she had only asked us to leave early so there could be peace in the house, that no one could rest with a baby crying around. The message was so loaded with venom that I almost felt sick reading it. I had endured enough of her manipulation, and this was the last straw. I couldn't contain myself anymore. With hands trembling with rage, I wrote my response and told her she would never see Lily again. I told her that I had no intention of ever allowing someone like her, who treated my baby like a nuisance, to have any part in our lives. Lily didn't need a grandmother like that, so disgustingly privileged and controlling. I told Karen exactly what I thought. I didn't care if it was harsh or if it meant she would never speak to me again. The truth needed to be told. I made it clear that it wasn't my fault the holidays had been canceled. It had been her own actions that caused this. She had made it clear that our family was not welcome if we didn't fit into her image of the perfect family holidays. I sent the message and sat down. My heart was pounding. Somehow it felt liberating to have defended myself so firmly. I braced myself for her reaction. But what other choice did I have? Continue to tolerate her treatment? Let my daughter grow up knowing her grandmother didn't want her around because she was just a crying baby? Kyle had seen the message before I sent it and was by my side when I pressed send. He looked at me with an expression full of support. He hadn't wanted to be the one to cut ties, but he agreed with everything I had said. He had no intention of ever allowing his family to continue treating us like that. Minutes after sending the message, my phone vibrated with a response from Karen. I almost didn't want to read it, but I knew I should. She was trying to justify herself by claiming that she only wanted the best for everyone and that it was nothing personal. She said I was overreacting, that she was just trying to help Jessica get through a difficult time, and that Lily's presence would have been the only thing preventing peace. I didn't bother to respond. I didn't need to. The conversation was over. Kyle's reaction had been all I needed. His support, his willingness to back me up had made all the difference. He stood by me without questioning me, and we both knew we had made the right decision. The next morning, I received a message from Jessica. It was a long, rambling text full of venom and accusations. She told me I was ruining the family, that I had ruined the holidays, and that I would regret this. She accused me of driving Kyle away from his family, of making him choose between them and me. She wanted to play the victim, and I was no longer interested. I didn't respond. I knew I didn't need to give her explanations. Update 4. Despite everything that had happened, Kyle was determined to salvage something positive from this chaotic holiday season. He knew we needed to regain our peace, and the only way to do that was to surround ourselves with the right people. He reached out to Jessica's ex-husband, Mark, who had always been a good friend of his. They had known each other for years. Kyle invited him to spend the holidays with us, knowing it would give him a much-needed opportunity to spend time with someone he liked, while also rubbing it in his mother's and Jessica's faces. I had met Mark on several occasions, and although things hadn't ended well with Jessica, I could see he was a good guy. I appreciated that he wasn't one to play the blame game, especially with everything that had happened with Jessica. He didn't hesitate to set boundaries and do what was best for himself. Kyle's cousin Rachel also offered to come and help with the cooking. She had always been more relaxed than the rest of the family, and I had always gotten along well with her on the few occasions we met. It was refreshing to know she was eager to contribute food and bring some positive energy to our home. She wasn't one to try to fix things or get involved in family disputes. She just wanted to enjoy the holidays with us and make sure we had a good time. She didn't care about Karen and her rules, and everyone knew it. It was hilarious how indifferent she was about it. Kyle's father, Dave, was another key figure in this plan. After everything had calmed down and he had time to reflect on his wife's behavior, he felt it was important to show his support, despite the tension between him and Karen. He had no problem attending our gathering. Kyle had made it clear that his father was welcome, and Dave was more than willing to set aside any lingering resentment to be with us. Some of Kyle's cousins, whom we hadn't seen in a long time, also accepted the invitation. It was the perfect mix of people. People who weren't caught up in the drama and who genuinely wanted to make the most of the holidays. The atmosphere was completely different from what we had expected just a week before. There was no stress, no passive-aggressive comments, and, most importantly, no toxic energy. As the day went on, I realized how right Kyle had been to make these changes. The house was filled with laughter and genuine conversations, a stark contrast to the tension and pain that had weighed on us for days. Mark and Kyle's cousin hit it off immediately, exchanging funny stories and jokes while preparing food together. Rachel insisted on making her famous stuffing, while Mark contributed his legendary mashed potatoes. When Dave arrived, he immediately expressed his gratitude for the invitation. He was kind and even a bit remorseful, but it was evident that he had no interest in stirring up family drama. The focus was on the people who really mattered, those who were truly present and supportive of us.